I've had much more success using microarrays with adults, which is problematic because Children's Hospital, this is not an adult hospital, it's a children's hospital, but we'll sneak them around. Everybody is right now juggling until the government decides they're going to fund microarrays. So I snuck a few things in, primarily in my neurogenetics thing, which is probably 75% of what I do now. And finding some really interesting things that takes me back to the ataxia story. So after seeing many patients with ataxia, my reputation is I'm an ataxia guy, a physician who's now retired, moved to Victoria, concerned about his family history, not so much for himself, but for his daughter who's in her 40s and has schizophrenia. And he wants to know if they need to make provisions for her. And that taught me a second thing or a third thing. I've lost track how many things I've been doing. The neurologists take a neurological family history. Medical geneticists take a genetic family history. So when you take a genetic family history, you learn all kinds of things about these other non-neurological phenotypes. And this is not a family history typical of schizophrenia, and it was not a family history for typical ataxia. Let's do an array. Bingo. He has a deletion on chromosome 3. He has spinocerebellar type 15, probably the first man in Canada, person in Canada to be diagnosed as SCA15. But in this country and in Europe, which is so far ahead of Canada in many of these things, the rule is after you do the panel, you do in a microarray because it's 10% of autosomal dominant spinocerebellar ataxia. It's a big number. Now we're on the verge of having access to exome sequencing. And still in British Columbia, it's considered a research priority. But there are ways that you can persuade the provincial insurance people to allow us to send a sample to one of the American labs for exome sequencing. And we're making all kinds of diagnoses now, which takes me into the future, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the most recent thing to bring the prenatal diagnosis back to its origins, I was just looking at television last night about this country's decision to have a pilot study of non-invasive prenatal diagnosis. So that's been available to us for a year now, year and a half in Canada. You have to pay for it. It's about $800, which is roughly 400 euros or 400 pounds. But the population that's asking for that are primarily couples who've gone through a great deal of effort to become pregnant. Because of infertility issues, they spent $20,000 becoming pregnant. They're 40 years of age, they're at risk for chromosomal abnormality, and the last thing they want to do is an invasive amnio, and so they're happy to pay that kind of money. The people in Vancouver who run the provincial prenatal screening program have signaled that they're going to persuade the government to swap out ultrasound and maternal serum screening and all of that in favor of pre-implantation diagnosis, because then we won't be doing amnios. We won't have the lab culture for costs. So we're in that kind of transition.